Welcome everybody to Spotlight Series CommunityWorksInstitute.org. You got to check them out. Joe Brooks is the head of Community Works Institute, which provides professional development for K through 16 educators. And part of that professional development are these Friday and Sunday shows. Also, there's a winter and summer session that CommunityWorksInstitute.org does, and you should sign up and get all that good professional development, because Community Works Institute brings the community to the classroom and the classroom to the community. They do really cool storytelling activities, diversity justice activities, and they get students interacting with folks on the streets. Well, back in the old days when we could do that, and doing ethnography with students, and really trying to get students to tell their own stories while learning from other people's stories on the streets in LA, in New York, in Chicago. It's everywhere. So CommunityWorksInstitute.org is really, really interesting nonprofit to connect with. Joe Brooks, thank you for having my show on here today. And Craig Alimo, thank you so much for being here. We met at, oh Lord, Encore, was it a while ago?
Did John Hernandez connect with us, I think, on LinkedIn?
Oh, you're right. That was the start.
Yeah.
That was the start. Very good memory. Thank you, John Hernandez.
Yeah, thank you, John Hernandez.
And here we are. And I was looking at your CV, and you've been to a lot of different, you've been in Massachusetts, you've been at Maryland, you got a PhD looking at white allyship. You do a lot of interesting work about intergroup dialogue. Tell the folks in this session who you are.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Zach. And well, before we get started, I just wanted to point out, it looks like you're displaying a book.
Oh, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay.
Oh, you mean that book right there?
Yeah, we got the new book out. So excited about that. Yeah, it's about whiteness and challenging status quo in higher ed. Ken Roth and I are the editors, but we got Dr. Charles Davis, we got Dr. Sumi Pendekar endorsing, we got Dr. Walter Allen. It's really, really exciting. And we talk about neoliberalism, and we talk about, just toxic structures within higher ed that can be changed. We got Dr. Carter. Yeah. And how, like, basically in the vein of like Ibram X. Kendi, how do we change policies, programs, and procedures within higher ed in order to make it more equitable for everybody? Right, because the work that we do, it's not just good enough to be nice guys and nice allies. Like, what are we doing to actually change the policies to be anti-racist? Right. So thank you for thank you.
Well, as our institutions of tertiary education, right, are managing, dealing with, I don't know, as our country is reminded of not just the pandemic that we're in, but the other pandemic that we're reminded of around racism and structural racism, and a lot of institutions like my own that are trying to look at some practical ways to undo some of our racist policies, our racist structures, and looking at the way we're trying to do stuff. A book like that might be helpful. So yeah. I gotta figure out how to get me a copy.
Check it out. And my Joe Brooks in my ear is saying, say the name again. So Whiteness, Power, and Resisting Change in U.S. Higher Ed, a Peculiar Institution, which is a play off of slavery in America, obviously. Palgrave.
Right on.
Check it out. It's on like Amazon and some other stuff, but it's kind of our second book, so it's expensive still. So hopefully we're trying to get the price down so people actually read it and get to implement some of this information. But so you're at Napa Valley Community College, and you're the
I'm actually at San Jose State now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. And then I was looking at the resume and I was like, uh-oh. Okay.
I guess I didn't update it.
No. So, well, give us a little bit of your background and your journey. up to San Jose State.
Wow. Well, I could say, currently I serve as, well, I should say I'm Craig. He, him, his are my pronouns. I serve as a diversity and inclusion trainer / educator in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at San Jose State University. I work for our senior diversity officer, Dr. Kathleen Wong Lau. Been there for a couple years. Gee whiz, how did I get there? I mean, how far back we want to go? Birth? Pre-birth? I mean,
It's Valentine's Day, so I want to be kind to you. Whatever you want to share.
Right on. Well, I guess, I think, I'd like to call myself a social justice educator. And I guess I've been doing this work for, a fair amount of time, a bit over 20 years. And I think I've sort of, I don't know, stumbled and fumbled my way through that time and up to that time when I started doing this type of work. I guess given my identities, given my backgrounds, cis straight white dude, sort of raised middle class, upper middle class, depending on how you count, and I found this work in some ways that was, I guess, not necessarily connected to my identity, although in some ways it was. I was a history major and a philosophy minor as an undergrad student, which is great in the working world to have those degrees.
But in the work that we do, I was a history major and I love philosophy, and it does, because that may have got you into racial justice work. Because if you look at our history or any history of the world, it's plain as day, right? That here's this caste structure that's been in place since we can remember: colonialism, whiteness, all the things, male patriarchy. Now, what am I going to do with my life now that I know all this stuff in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I was really turned on to, actually, of all things, sort of like Soviet and Russian history, and as an undergrad, and I thought I might pursue that more in graduate school, and then I got learned about different movements, different economic structures, different the United States, right? So
what was it about the Soviet stuff that got you interested?
No, I found I did have some great professors who were great storytellers. I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
I was curious about I think I became through some courses I took with some professors. I was curious about different economic, setups,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Socialism and communism, those things I found really interesting and fascinating, and some of the stories that came out of the way in which the Russia and the Soviet Union, went through time, I found really interesting as well. And there was a connection also for me, I sort of, around the history and philosophy and science and technology that sort of dovetailed with that as well. And I think there was some social issues that were a part of that study of history. I think the science and history and philosophy with science and technology is something that brought me to authors like Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions, and this idea of paradigms, the way in which that sort of systems have been set up and are politically imbued with power. And during that same time started learning about sort of identity-based ways of knowing. And I think there was a couple of other things that were going on in my life at that time too. It was around the same time as the police brutality that was going on in LA with Rodney King. So there's a lot of stuff that was sort of coming together. I was an RA. I remember being in like pre-service training, and I don't even know what we called it back then, like culture training or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And it would always end up at a fight, like some type of argument. And I always wondered what that was, probably because of I hope it's different now, but I think that my relationship to conflict back then was a little bit like I would like to run to the other room sort of thing.
Okay. Avoidance. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And so I think all these things sort of came together that got me sort of interested in this work. And
Mm.
I think it really, I saw student affairs as a place to maybe do that type of work. So when
Same.
when I went to grad school, again, super long story short, Jane Freed was the person who ran the program at Northeastern University where I went. And I remember talking with her when she was talking with me about, interviewing me about being in the master's program. I said, "Oh yeah, I've been doing some thinking about, did some reading as an undergrad, around Thomas Kuhn and paradigms and stuff like that." And she's like, "You're in." And I'm like, so because Jane had soon thereafter published a book on shifting paradigms in student affairs, and there was some simpatico around that. I mean, at least not that I didn't have anything to do with.
What is Kuhn, for folks that don't know and folks like me that don't really know, what is Kuhn saying about paradigms?
Well, he was one of the folks who have sort of used the term paradigm in terms of laying out the ways in which the rules in which science the rules in which science and technology and the whole sort of like environment in which the way in which we are allowed to do research, the ways in which that we are able to study different phenomena, were in a different set of rules that was often imbued with social and political power.
Yeah.
And this idea of identity as paradigm, I think, and the ways in which that we sort of look at the world, and at that time of my life anyway, was something that helped me anyway sort of look at like, oh, there are different ways in which people are experiencing the world that are powerless, low power and high power perspectives, right? So that was one sort of I know it's a weird way to say this is how I found this work, but this is sort of
No,
the way which I
nothing.
got there, you know.
All this, but all this work is about power and uh, structures and who's in and who's out, and so it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, when I was in my master's program, I remember reading Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he came to campus. Jane got me in a room with like 20 other people. I met the guy. He signed my book. Anyway, it's not about the star stuff. It's the
No, but that's
star stuff. But like
some of that stuff leads you to this work. But go ahead.
Yeah, and while I was also there at Northeastern, I was thinking about I really want to do. I didn't even know what to call it at the time, right? Diversity education, social justice education. I didn't have that language at that time. I found myself in doing an internship in this place called the Study for the what is it, the Center for the Study of Sport and Society. And there was this guy there. His name is Jackson Katz, and Jackson Katz is this guy who has been looking at, has been doing gender justice stuff for a long time, really looking at masculinity and looking at ways that men can step up and do more with men around, and in this case, this Mentors in Violence Prevention program, which I was drawn to, or MVP for short. The Center for the Study of Sport and Society tried to use sort of like sports culture as a way to do what I think we would now call social justice education.
Interesting.
And using sports culture as sort of a vehicle to do that. And Jackson's program, the MVP program, was a place I was like, oh, as a guy, I think I can, there's something I can do here working with other guys. And Jackson led, anti-sexism workshops with guys in locker rooms, anti-sexism, anti-rape, he was probably one of the, he claimed, I believe him when he claims that he was probably the first person to really do bystander education. And so that was sort of like, well, this is a place where I can sort of maybe do this work, and that sort of set me in a trajectory.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I can make a contribution here because I can utilize my identities and to help somebody else, and maybe a white fraternity guy may see himself in me and change his behavior. So I want to talk about a lot of stuff, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. We're two cishet white dudes who do racial justice work, gender justice work, economic justice work. Whew. What, well, what are some of the challenges that you, uh, I don't know, that you've experienced? Well, let me take a step back. Should guys like us be doing work like this?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
right. I think that there are spaces and places for us to do the work. I think that I do think that there are spaces and places for us to do the work. There are spaces and places for us to lead.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that when we think about um, working with folks with different identities, working with folks from different social groups, low power groups, people from marginalized communities,
Right.
I don't think that's a place for us to be out in front.
We
Um,
need to know our place, when to step forward, when to step back.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And let others lead, and maybe organize folks that look like us to also get in the struggle. Like Malcolm X said, white folks need to organize white folks and teach white folks about racism, because if they're the biggest promulgators of racism, right, racism is not a black or brown people problem. That, like, white folks are the biggest pushers, so to speak, of
Sword.
racism, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
and some white folks may hear it better coming out of our lips. All right.
Yeah, and which is I think it's Tim Wise who talks about, I can say the same thing that other people of color have been saying for a long time, and it just might land differently because of the racism that's embedded in me and in the people that we may be speaking with.
Right.
Same damn message
Right.
may have a different impact.
Right. Right.
So
No, 100%. What? So let's get into some of the uncomfortable stuff, which I think is, I yeah, I don't think people talk about it enough. What are there moments that feel uncomfortable doing this work, where there's certain gatekeepers that say you shouldn't be doing this work, or if you just feel weird about it yourself, or I don't know, what tell us about some of the uncomfortableness in doing this work.
yeah, well, I think there's a discomfort certainly around sort of developing trust
Yep.
in spaces and places, right?
Yep.
So I think that's legit.
Yeah.
um and it totally makes sense, right? So I mean, maybe this is a weird practical application of this, but just like, even think about, interviewing for a job,
Yeah.
to do this type of stuff, right? Like, I've totally I've been asked legal questions at jobs, but like, I'm not. This is going to sound like it's a reverse discrimination thing. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a fair. When I get a question like, as a white person, how do you think you could do this work?
Right.
I think that's a totally fair question. It might be illegal,
Yeah.
but it's totally fair, and I'll answer it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so so I think there's a lot of ways in which it's important for us, from privileged social group membership, to be able to speak to that.
Yeah.
And to it might, I've said this in the different positions I've been in, the different contexts I've been in. It might take me a lot longer to build trust with folks, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that comes from being able to step up, or when I screw up, to be able to fess up
Yeah.
when I do screw up.
Right. Do you, I tend to hide behind the Jewish identity and say, well, I'm proximate to the Holocaust, and my dad was born in a refugee camp. But I think that oftentimes doesn't convince certain folks, and maybe nor should it, right? Because it's not my lived experience. I wasn't in a concentration camp, and I benefit from white privilege. And I, it's an interesting, and I don't usually talk about this with anybody because I don't think it's not often welcomed as like kind of like, oh, talk about whiteness and
Well, yeah, get out the smallest violin in the world.
right.
You know,
And right, and the whole thing I think is it shouldn't be a pity party because we are going into a field where we actually, I think more white folks don't go into diversity stuff because you have to kind of humble yourself and you have to be ready and willing to go into environments where you are not going to have as much power. And I think it takes a certain personality type that cares about history, that understands philosophy, that I actually can, in collaboration with other folks, make a bigger impact on society if I kind of shut up and listen to other folks and then amplify some of those voices.
Hmm.
You know, and it's a very difficult thing to, it's like a tightrope to walk. Because you know, just by stepping in a room, people are like, F this guy. He doesn't know what the F he's talking about. But that's fine because the world is so effed up that I don't blame that person.
agreed.
And then it's like this interesting like cosmic dance where you're like trying to prove yourself to everybody, including white folks, with the hope that at the end of the day, someone's going to see what you're doing and be like, I didn't think that he belongs there, but if other white people are doing this work, maybe as a white person, I should care about this stuff. Or maybe as a black or brown person, they're like, okay, I guess some white people do care. This is great. It's weird.
Well, you know, in addition to, you know, what we're doing right now, maybe sort of centering whiteness or replicating whiteness or maleness or straightness or cisness, amongst other things, you know, I think that, how do I put this? I feel like, and I feel like even in this conversation, we're doing this a little bit, we are, there's also this ego investment that I feel like I spend a lot of time, probably like way too much time and energy on like managing ego stuff when it could be spent on, you know, working towards undoing social oppression, right? And in its form, in its many forms. And I think that, you know, I feel like that is such a waste of time and energy, and
It
and
is.
I feel like I need to whack that ego back or whatever. And that,
but isn't that the work? Isn't that the work that we're asking other white folks to do? To keep constantly doing the ego check, because all this socialization from our own upbringing, we have to constantly do it, and we're aware of it. We have like, you know, kind of the third eye or something, and we're asking other folks to develop this extra sensitivity and to check their own ego.
yeah, it's like I don't know if it's, the phrase is not no-win situation. That's not what I'm going for. But the idea of even just doing that is you're drawing attention to it in the first place. But then you're saying it's like this. Drawing attention to it, but don't look at it. You know?
How are you going to defeat, or we're never going to defeat it, but how are you going to challenge white supremacy if we don't name it?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. But you know, and that that dance, that that energy, that useless energy that we end up expending on this stuff, that gets in the way of working in collaboration with people who are different than myself, or even
Right.
working with people who are like myself
Right.
in the greater sort of like goal of, undoing social oppression. So it's like so I think I feel so I think that that's hard to do. I think I feel like a fraud most days.
Yep.
um
Same. Yeah.
you know um I I may also spend more energy than I would like to admit, as we're being streamed on Facebook. Right. More energy than I would like to admit that, about monitoring my own
Yep.
behaviors and
Yep.
speech and things like that, because I'm constantly, whether it is around, my maleness, my whiteness, my class,
Right.
um, my gender,
Yeah.
that I feel like there's a lot I'm trying to pay attention to. And like, I think we have sometimes talked about it in terms of competency. I don't feel that competent all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I told you, I was even kind of reticent to even do this
Sure. Sure. Sure.
thing we're doing right now, because it's like, I don't know, it seems first of all, you've had some amazing and wicked smart folks, in your series, and I'm like, what the hell do you want to talk to me about for? But anyway, so and then this whole idea about, I don't want to put a spotlight on me or us,
Right.
you know.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I think that those are some things that are real in terms of trying to show up in authenticity,
Yep.
cross difference, trying to show up in effectiveness within group.
So tell us a little bit about your, well, whatever you want to talk about. I mean, the PhD work around white allyship and some of your musings on current white allyship, or tell us about the intergroup dialogue work that you've done, and some of your musings on that.
Yeah, I think well, I think that there are lots of different forms of social justice educational stuff, right? So I see intergroup dialogue as one that's a really good one. I think that I did had a real powerful learning experience being a part of a research team that was looking at intergroup dialogue and its effectiveness. I should probably put it in a little bit of context. Um, so I had the great fortune to work with Jimena Zanega at UMass Amherst.
Really? Oh wow.
Yeah, so
Oh,
so
wow.
after I was done with my master's at Northeastern, I got a job, as a residence director at UMass Amherst, and I found myself getting a lot of my professional development in their social justice education program. And so I took a lot of classes there. In fact, they gave me when I left UMass, I guess I had enough for a coupon, a certificate of advanced graduate study. Us white people, we like to credential. Anyways, so the point of this is that, like, I had a powerful learning experience in that program, both about designing and facilitating social justice education, but sort of got this specific sort of practice around doing intergroup dialogue. And when I went to start on another degree at Maryland, we were starting up an intergroup dialogue program there. Sort of around the same time was the Supreme Court holdings from the Gratz and Grutter v. Bollinger cases.
Mm.
So if you might recall, it's a part of sort of the longer history of affirmative action in higher education. After the Hopwood case, the first Hopwood case, or the second Hopwood case in Texas,
Mm.
the Supreme Court said, what's the compelling interest for diversity in college and university campuses?
Mm.
And Gratz and Grutter, what came out of those holdings, and all of the research by that was part of the work of was the expert defense from Dr. Patricia Gurin,
Mm.
in sort of documenting and doing the research and doing research around the educational benefits of diversity, just the mere presence of it being on campus,
Mm.
and all the amicus briefs, like we heard from like the military and other places,
Mm.
sort of laid the groundwork for like, yeah, like there's all these compelling reasons about the presence of diversity in college and university campuses. It makes us smarter, right?
Mhm.
It makes everybody smarter,
Yeah.
but it also makes us think more complexly. It helps us. It helps us do better on graduate entrance exams. It helps predict involvement in community
Mm,
service.
mm.
um, I think I said perspectives already. And what's going to say, but that's just the mere presence. But what do we do when we leverage it,
Yeah.
right? So programs like intergroup dialogue
Mm.
that really use research going way back to the 50s from
Oh,
Gordon Allport, the contact
oh yeah,
hypothesis,
output.
right?
Yeah.
And really capitalizing on this stuff. So like, and what this research project did that, in I learned a ton in the context of that. I got some dissertation data out of it, right, through that process, but just really learned about some of the ways in which that intergroup dialogue is a powerful way to reduce bias, to
Mm,
increase empathy,
mm,
and it has all these gobs of positive outcomes that are associated with it,
mm,
right?
mm,
Um,
mm.
so uh, my own work within sort of that context was looking at white people who went through a race-based intergroup dialogue
Interesting.
program,
Interesting.
and sort of what was their confidence and frequency
Mm,
of doing doing being in a relationship, doing aligning behaviors at the personal level,
mm,
friend level, and intergroup collaborative levels,
mm,
confidence and frequency, right?
mm,
Um, so, very long story short, there
mm,
was no difference in the confidence of students who went through the program at
mm,
all these three levels when compared with a what do you call it, a control group.
mm,
But there were differences in frequency at all three levels, right?
mm, mm.
So even though those students who came out of this race dialogue were no more confident than their peers who didn't do it, they were still engaging in aligning behaviors with more frequency than their counterparts.
Huh. So they became more comfortable, or they just wanted to do more?
No more comfortable, but
No,
they did it.
they
I
did
think
it.
more
Okay,
importantly, they
interesting.
engaged in
Interesting.
aligning behaviors towards themselves, aligning behaviors, racial, uh, um, white racial aligning behaviors with friends, white racial aligning behaviors in intergroup collaborative spaces.
For folks listening to the session, what does it mean to be a white ally?
Um, it means to advocate. I think in a variety of ways. It means to advocate and to take actions, to disrupt, to undo, to work towards ending racism. Um, Punto. But there's a lot of variety in there. And what I was looking at with my study were pretty limited also about
Mm,
what are some things that I do for myself? What do I do with my friends? How
mm,
do I engage in spaces or work that is intergroup collaborative,
mm,
cross race
mm,
um, interactions?
mm.
So, but there's obviously gobs more than that.
Right,
Uh,
right, right. Because there's intergroup dialogues that focus on. I did one at UCLA about classism, and so they handpicked student. I mean, it was, I don't know how they did this, but they, I guess, based on college um, stuff that you submit upon arrival, like how much money your parents make. And so they had rich kids in there, they had middle class kids, and they had, I shouldn't say kids, students, and they had working class students. And then that was really an interesting, tough class. People cried, especially wealthier students who didn't know that other people were struggling as much as they were struggling. A lot of ignorance. Well, why don't you just run around your block to get exercise? Why, or why don't you just get a gym subscription? And it's like, well, my neighborhood's not safe. I can't run around the block. Well, why don't you just go to Trader Joe's and get this type of food? It's much healthier. Well, I live in a food desert. This is what a food desert is. Um, well, my boyfriend got me these earrings and this necklace because, and they're Tiffany's, you know, fancy, and they cost this much money. And I own a horse, and I put this horse in a stable, and it costs 100,000 to keep a horse each year. And it's just like, I learned a lot. And so those were the tough moments in intergroup dialogue. And there's 4 stages, right, of intergroup dialogue.
Yep.
Like, I forget the first one, but the second one's
group beginnings.
Group beginnings. Okay.
Yeah. Learning about social inequality.
Right. Cultural chest sharing, right?
Yeah. I might do that. That might be stage 1 thing.
Yeah.
Stage 3 might be about hot topics.
Right.
And stage 4 is about moving towards action.
Right, like that, and that's where the Community Works Institute stuff comes in, of like, what is a group project that we're working on in the neighborhood to fight homelessness or fight whatever we're doing. There was also one about citizenship and undocumented folks and documented folks and international folks and the privileges within those intricacies, which was really, really interesting, because you know, there were some Chinese international students who were like, it sucks, I don't get to you know, get these jobs, and I don't have a future in this country after I graduate, so I'm really like schwitzing it. And then there were some American students who were just like, whoa, like, I didn't even know that you were going through this, because I'm just going to take a year off after college and just, you know, chill. So there's a lot of, it's always about like the pyramid and who's got the power and who doesn't, and how do we get folks on the top of the pyramid to understand what's going on in the middle and the bottom of the pyramid, and how to eventually, hopefully, maybe change that pyramid into a different shape that will be more equitable for everybody. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing at San Jose State doing this work? 2-parter, pre-COVID and now COVID.
Oh yeah. I think that let's see, pre-COVID, what are some of the challenges of doing this work? I think well, I believe that intergroup dialogue is a powerful medium for doing bias reduction, for doing social justice educational work. I don't think it's and this might be pre or post COVID. I don't think it's always the best way to go. So like, you know, I'm thinking about this quote from James Baldwin a lot, that actually I have it up on my screen because I thought I might talk about it. So
yeah.
The quote is, "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist." So I think intergroup dialogue is a really powerful way, and it's well researched. And not just, you know, my study was like that much that much research that was a part of that larger study. 10 campuses, people, there were researchers, practitioners. It was amazing. Anyway, you could see, well, you know, you can see the book. It's called Google Dialogue Across Difference. It's a Sage book. It's a big tome. It's the editors are Pat Gurin, Jimena Zanega, and Ratnesh Nagda. Anyway, not that I intended to plug a book. Anyway, but you know, I think pre or post COVID, you know, with the type of discourse that is out there right now around political differences and how that aligns with social inequality and identity, I think it's just really hard if you are in a dialogue with somebody who just doesn't like acknowledge facts. Right. I think that's really hard. Yeah. You know, like, and I'm guilty of this. I've had some friends on Facebook that I've just said, you know what, I can't do this with you because you're not even taking into consideration actual facts. Right. And I have regrets about just saying, you know what, I'm done. I'm not canceling you. I'm not defriending you, but I'm just not going to engage with you
Yeah,
anymore,
yeah, yeah,
at least not for a while, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so this idea, if there are, I don't know if intergroup dialogue is necessarily the best medium or method
Mm.
to do this work. If that is the conditions in which we're working on, maybe that's like caucus group work is more important, like intra group um, dialogues, I think are
Well,
probably more important.
what are some other techniques then that you would use both on your campus, but you would also recommend for the general population?
One thing that we do on our campus that's I think is really cool. It was there before I got there. Was there is this and we've had to stop it because of seminar, because of funding. It's a seminar for faculty, and particularly for white faculty. It's a whiteness seminar for white faculty,
Hmm.
where we um, try to create a space where number one, people of color are not burdened with educating us knuckleheads,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, still using texts that and videos and other forms of media that bring voices of folks in color into that space. Um,
Hmm.
there's a great anthology called Presumed Incompetent, which is our stories from um, folks of color who are in tertiary education, as in predominantly in faculty ranks, sort of telling their testimonials about their experiences that we used in that seminar.
Hmm.
But having conversations with other white people, and in this case other white faculty, thinking about like, well, how does this show up? What type of self-awareness work that we need to do? How can we look at things like Tema Okun's white supremacy culture, and how does that show up in our work, both in the courses that we teach, as well as in the departments and that we work in,
Hmm.
right? Well, how are some of the ways that we can even practice having conversations
Hmm.
with other white people? We'll do some of that
Hmm.
stuff within that
Hmm.
within that space as well. I mean, I
Hmm.
would say there were, whether it be faculty or staff or students, I've been a part of and helped run
Hmm.
spaces in which white people talk to each other, and
Hmm.
I think I've had some successes and some failures in terms of the way in which those groups go. But I think
What
it's another way, particularly where I think that in those spaces or those times or those contexts in which intergroup dialogue might not be either we don't have enough time to do it,
Yeah,
or we don't have
yeah.
enough engagement cross difference to be able to do it.
What in the spirit of storytelling, what are some of those moments where you've had students and the aha light has gone on for them and it's felt
Mm,
really good for you or your presenters?
it's a great question. I can't remember when I've had an aha moment, to be honest. Not as of late, anyway. I'm not actually trying to find any in my brain right now, and I'm and
Yeah.
I'm having a tough time.
Well,
I don't wonder if that says something. It's like, even in these spaces,
yeah.
that might say something about the way either I'm perceiving stuff, or the way in which that us white people may be so defensive that there's just not a lot of that I can remember, like any dramatic,
Mm.
made for TV scenes. Like, I can't think of any
But
off the top of
also,
my head.
but maybe that's the gradual nature of this work that makes it tough and sometimes frustrating because it doesn't happen overnight. And you plant
Mm.
seeds, you never know if those seeds are going to just get washed away in the rain or they're actually going to blossom. Um, how
Yeah,
has
I
go ahead.
do think that if you are driven for what's the word or the phrase I'm looking for, if you need like immediate feedback, or if you need like, this is not
Yeah,
this is
gratification.
not the place for it, you know what I mean? Like, we say that about teaching in general,
Yeah,
right? About, we don't necessarily always see in the moment, like, these moments of enlightenment that happen, satori, whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
um
yeah.
I think that I would say that there are some seeds that get planted and I hope that they sprout someday. And I think that's probably also a good critique about the effectiveness of this type of work also, that
Yeah.
I think is fair and totally up for critique in terms of like, I think in the, I don't know, I'm riffing now, sorry. I'm thinking about like, social justice, anti-racism education, like in the 70s,
Yeah. Yeah.
as I would talk to people like our elders who have been doing the work for a long time, people like Dr. Barbara Love, or maybe even Dr. Francie Kendall,
Hmm.
or amazing people like Alan Creighton,
Hmm.
Paul Kivel, or those types. Anyway, like what we did in the 70s before my time,
Hmm.
we would engage white people at a feeling level, right? We would try to get white people to feel guilty about who they are, or feel guilty
Hmm.
about their position, and
Yeah.
that doesn't work. We know
Yeah.
that doesn't work, Um,
Hmm.
and as we have gone through time and trying to figure out different ways to crack the nut
Yeah.
of not just individual sort of white supremacy or white supremacy culture, as we look at larger sort of systemic stuff. I think that we're not very good at it, right? In some ways,
Yeah.
because we still have this stuff, and white people are still stupid.
Right.
The way in which we interact interpersonally, the way in which white supremacy culture sort of still exists,
Right.
right? Stuff around timeliness, perfection, name all the stuff that Oken talks about, right?
Hmm.
Not to mention, the systems and the
Hmm.
institutions and the structures that are built upon those institutions, right?
Hmm.
So we got sadly, a long way to go.
Well, isn't that the Derek Bell thing that Derek Bell's the father of critical race theory, looking at embedded racism within our legal system from the beginning of slavery to now. Um, he's looking at white folks and or dominant folks will only change stuff if it benefits them.
Hmm.
And he points at 1954, Brown versus Board of Education was not out of the goodness of white folks' hearts, but we looked like fools. The U.S. did on a national scale, international scale, because we were trying to get Russia and China and India and all these other places to change their society, and we're the victors of World War II, and we still are barbarians in the way that we're treating Black folks in the South. And so then like, okay, we need to have like integration. Um, do you get a little bit pessimistic sometimes, where if in the 70s the shame and guilt thing didn't work, now we're seeing kind of, well, if the shame and guilt thing doesn't work, then we're going to use social media to kind of attack people in power and get those people out of power in the hopes of changing organizations. Are you, I don't know, more pessimistic or optimistic looking at where we're going in power justice, racial justice, diversity work?
Ooh. Good question. I am I pet. I think if I were pessimistic all the time, I wouldn't still be doing it.
Yep.
So I think there's that. I do think that the work has changed, particularly in tertiary ed, over the years. Like, in the 90s and maybe the aughts, we had this sort of like focus on multicultural competence.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that decentralized a lot of efforts. We say, well, if everybody can just, increase their competencies, we'll be better.
Yeah.
And I think the pendulum has sort of swung a little bit, where in the past, I don't know, 15 or so years, we've been seeing um, the establishment of some infrastructure around a senior diversity officer in in tertiary ed, post-secondary ed, higher ed, that if they are really empowered, if those positions and those roles are really empowered to do good work,
Yeah.
I think that there are some things that are positive that can come out of it. I do think, like, for example, um, when I think about like a place like San Jose State, when my boss was hired, she was hired as the inaugural senior diversity officer there,
Mm,
that some stuff has happened, some stuff has moved. The
mm,
speed at which it has moved,
mm,
I think is, I think for some folks from marginalized communities, for some folks, for some folks of color, particularly Black folks, probably not fast enough,
yeah,
and I think that's fair.
mm,
To what extent are those positions sort of aligned to be effective?
right,
Like my last position, I was sort of kind of a senior diversity officer at Napa.
yeah,
I'm not sure the way that position was. Um, I'm not sure that the way that position was set up to be successful.
huh,
Um,
yeah,
maybe it was me in the role, but I also think the way in which I was reporting to a VP, I wasn't reporting to a president,
right, right,
right? So, not that that's like, well, this is an ego thing, not
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? It wasn't
yeah,
it
yeah,
wasn't about that, but it's like
right,
what type of change can be enacted
right,
around policies or procedures, unless the folks who are actually making the policies are engaged.
mm, mm,
So I would say that that there's definitely been some positive things that have happened at San Jose State. One of our initiatives that we're engaged in at the moment. Well, we had just, like, for example, we just have finished a campus climate assessment,
yeah,
which was totally messed up by COVID, because in the middle of we put the survey out. I mean, we did some stuff, but we did some focus groups beforehand to help inform what questions we were going to ask. We started the administration of the survey, and then we went to shelter in place, and it was like, I don't know how I don't know how good our data is because of the conditions in which
mm,
everything had changed, in the middle of the administration of the survey. But we have some data to work on, and the patterns are as you would expect they are,
mm, mm,
in terms of how people are expecting the excuse me, how people are experiencing the environment,
yeah,
at San Jose State, in terms of
yeah,
people low power identities, right, are not having a great time, right? So if we just believe, if we just believed women, if we just believed people of color, if we just believed queer folks, if we just believed people with disabilities, that stuff wasn't going well for them, we wouldn't need a chief diversity officer. We wouldn't need to do these large,
right,
surveys, right?
right,
But here we are, we're doing it. And one, this is a long way to grandma's house. One of the things we're doing right now is we have invited our deans, department heads, and VPs to come up with plans about how they would move their organization forward on a sort of a takeoff of the Jackson and Holvino multicultural organizational development model
huh,
that has sort of an anti-racism bent on
mm,
that model. And we've asked everyone to write some plans in the past 6 months about looking at this model. What are some things that you can look at your division, your area, that you
mm,
can change to move your
nice,
organization in a more complex position on this model?
nice,
Um, so I think that those are all good things.
yeah,
I think that they sometimes go at a snail's pace.
yeah. What something that Joe Brooks likes me to ask folks is, what about the community of San Jose? Like, yeah, are there experiential opportunities for your students in the local community? And what do you think in general of that, the power that comes from experiential learning in communities?
Yeah, I think that we have research that speaks to its efficacy,
Right.
right?
Right.
There's lots of stuff about community service learning. There's lots of stuff that's out there about when, as one of many ways, right, for college students to think more complexly about themselves, to think more complexly about um, social inequality in general, social oppression in general,
Right.
that these types of experiences are effective ways to advance students, and around their thinking about some of these things, and might help predict um, students being more involved in their communities after they're done with their
Mm,
undergraduate studies, right? Or maybe even during them.
mm,
But yeah, I do think that there's lots of positive stuff that comes out of that.
mm, mm.
I would say I've been working on campus for a couple years now. I know, like, we have our Cesar Chavez Community Action Center.
Oh, geez.
Um, my colleague Diana Victor runs at San Jose State. They do a bunch of awesome things. They also have some peer educators that are part
Mm,
of peer leadership educators that are part of that operation.
interesting.
Do a community garden. They do a bunch of stuff that's really awesome. Our communiversity office that does some community service, that does community service learning as a part of its mission.
Mm,
Is I don't know of any research they've done or any documentation of the efficacy of the work that they do,
yeah,
but I know
no.
they do really cool things. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, I think that's really, really important for student civic life, and maybe even encouraging folks to be in some type of public, maybe even public service in the future.
yeah, no, totally. What's something that you would tell K through 16 educators that you wish they would implement in their classroom, in their administrative life, that would help folks both with high power and medium and low power?
Oh boy. I think if you think it's important for, I was thinking in particular about white folks or men
Mm,
in particular, well, people with, men, white folks, heterosexual folks, is to continue to do learning and be in conversation with people who are different than you. I
mm,
don't mean in like a cheesy,
sure.
like, hey, I see you in the faculty lounge. Hey, can we have dinner? Not to have true, authentic relationships across difference. I think those are really important. I think that, and I also think it's important to continue to do self work and think about how this stuff shows up in your practice,
Mm,
right? How social inequality may show up in your practice, and to order to, I've seen some really funny memes about how diversity training won't solve this. Um, I do think, though, that there are some ways in which that diversity training or different types of experiential activities that could get people to come to awareness about themselves and about the systems in which they help continue to promulgate, right?
sure.
Um, the systems in which they enact in their everyday, there's to keep learning and to keep thinking about the ways in which this stuff shows up. I mean, maybe here's like maybe a dumb example, but like something as simple as like taking attendance in college. Maybe this doesn't work for K16, but I think
Yeah.
about in college, like what's the hang up with faculty and taking attendance? Is that an ego thing, or are you doing that because if students are there, then they're going to learn, they're going to be successful? I understand those, but there are some things that people just hang on to
Yeah.
like so tightly, that I'm just like, can we just let go of that and have that not be a part of somebody's grade? I don't know. So, I mean, I think that's a great example of white supremacy culture, right? About like being on time,
Mm,
um,
mm,
uh, and having a grade associated with that. I don't
yeah.
know. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think questioning dominant habits is really important. And I think people are scared to do so. And I worry about this time period because white folks and dominant groups respond very strangely to events that should be pretty self-explanatory, like the killing of George Floyd, Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Sandra Bland. The response that I'm seeing now, and also to COVID, is all right, we just need to get some more Black and brown folks into this school or org at the bottom of the pyramid. but not necessarily at the top of the pyramid. And then even if we get some queer folks, folks with disabilities, Black and brown folks at the top of the pyramid, let's keep replicating the same system. Martin Luther King said, just because you have black faces in high places doesn't mean that's progress or success or the promised land or the end goal.
Yeah.
Like, how do we change and challenge some of the same profit motive and same results of higher ed institutions that still kind of see it as, I mean, hopefully folks don't, but some people do see it as like a factory line where it's like, let's just get the raw materials, put them through the machine, and then go out into the world, and we don't really want to hear from you again. How do we change that system? And maybe some folks would say, if you have Black and brown and queer faces in high places, that will change the system machine part of that. And partly I think they're right. I think they are.
I think it's a piece.
It's a piece.
It's a piece. Like, it's, I think it's totally important to have, to have a variety of folks in leadership positions and all the way through the organization. I also think that if our systems that we continue to operate under still create an inequality, right, are still creating inequity, there, and also then there's the environment in which that we work in, or we do the work that we're doing. If that environment isn't seen as welcoming, or people don't have a sense of belonging or sense of connection to it, right, that matters too.
Right. Yeah, no, that's, go ahead.
I was going to say, so as much as I think it's important to have diversity throughout our organizations, right? There are these other pieces that we can't ignore.
Right. I think about end goals, and then
and maybe just to say a little bit more to that, I think that there are well, we need to believe what people when they tell us that they're inequitable, number one. Number two, we could also do some work to like look at some stuff. So like, for example, if we how do I talk about this without getting in trouble at work? Well, now we don't edit these things, do we? Because we're live. Okay, never mind. So I think about like when I worked at another institution, right? Not the institution I'm at, but another institution. And we do some type of climate assessment, and we get some information about like the types of folks who are in a different major, or the types of folks who are not being successful in a major. Well, what's that about? We have the data there to we do a little bit of mining. I'm not saying that this like we only go tech and we only look at numbers, right? But there are some ways that we can do assessment and then drill down a little bit more and find out what's going on, to be able to undo some of those structures or some of those policies that are creating harm. Or even just to look at our friggin' policies. Like, all right, one of the places I used to work at had a policy that that said, if you're an outside group and you come on our campus grounds, you can't dig in the ground, you can't make a fire, you can't stay overnight, you can't create a structure in which you stay overnight, right? And I'm like, well, this is pretty much everything that happens on a powwow. So it's like clear as day when you just look at the policy. I go around and I ask them questions about this policy. I'm like, oh, well, there was a kerfuffle a few years ago when there was a powwow on our campus and and I'm like, well, what the F? Like this is crystal clear a policy that we need to get rid of.
Right.
That is that even though it's very plain language, it when you add it all up, it's like it's totally anti-indigenous. So it's stuff like that is not hard to do.
Mm.
But we need to, you know, we need to be able to learn about what the rules are. I think in order to be able to effectively navigate them while we're in them, but also try to figure out some ways to create some new ones.
Mm. Yeah, that is really, and I use this example a lot, but it's all, we can say that we're good people till the cows come home, but if we don't look at our policies and procedures, which is what Ibram X. Kennedy's talking about, changing the policies and procedures is the true anti-racist way to go. Um, George Floyd may still be alive today uh, if the bodega owner had not followed policy.
Mm.
The policy in the bodega was if you use a fake $20 bill, which supposedly he did, you call the police. You don't need to call the police when someone's using fake money. You can just say, I'm not going to take the money, right?
Mm.
It's a silly policy that has deadly consequences. And I think this is a great anti-indigenous example that you used. It's so specific, right? You can't drill into the ground, you can't light a fire, you can't do all these things, which is all the ways of saying you can't do this stuff at a powwow if and when we have a powwow. Um,
Essentially, we can't have a powwow on our campus because
yeah,
we've created this policy.
right. But we don't want to say that because then we're going to look racist.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And I mean, Isabel Wilkerson is doing a great job of this, where moving away from calling things racist, because I think a lot of dominant groups don't understand actually what that is anymore. And maybe they never did, but she's calling it casteist, right?
Hmm.
Because it's upholding a certain pyramid, a certain caste. And a lot of people, or some people, benefit from that. And so I think if we're more honest of what's happening here, which is not just like, I mean, we were joking about it before we went on air, that the Bachelor guy on the TV is getting a lot of flack because he went to a party, a plantation party in 2013. Some people will be like, okay, that's racist. Yeah, it's racist, but there's something much deeper going on there, that it's affirming a caste where Black people are supposed to be on plantations, and white people are supposed to celebrate the degradation of Black lives and Black humanity, but don't get too worried about it. It's just a joke. It's just a party. It's just, we're just having like uh, fun at someone else's expense and reaffirming this caste system um, that still exists today, right? COVID, who's an essential worker? Who essential worker means you're at the bottom of the caste and you're probably Black or brown, or maybe even other identities that are oppressed in society. So I don't know. I think it's very important for you and I to be doing this work, because there's way too many people that I've told them what I do, and white people tell me, well, why? Why are you doing diversity work? You shouldn't be doing that. Which makes me,
Who's telling us that? But that might be another conversation.
that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. Oftentimes strangers on dating sites, which I think is interesting. It's like, what do you do for a living? It's like, but what that's telling me also is they don't think they have anything to do with equity and justice work. And that really concerns me for humanity and society, because there's a whole swath of folks who are probably perpetuating all this toxic stuff that you and I talk about every day to our students,
including us,
including us, right? There's a lot of crap that we do that is harmful to people, and hopefully we're trying to mitigate that. And there's a whole bunch of folks that are not even trying to enter the arena. They're just like, oh, diversity and equity stuff, you mean Black and brown stuff? That's totally not for me. That's for somebody else. And with that continuing attitude, we will continue to see the pyramids getting even, what do you call it? Taller, more refined, more strict in all the different sectors: legal, business, education, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, yeah, thank you for doing the work that you do, because I think you approach this with a lot of vulnerability, a lot of honesty, and I think your students see that and will maybe want to replicate that authenticity in their own lived experiences.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it's about eliminating suffering, right? So I don't care if it's about me. I do care that it ends.
Yeah. Yep. I'm glad you said that, because going back, and I'll try to tie a bow on this, but going back to the beginning of our conversation of like why we do this work, it's very personal to me, because I don't want people to suffer, and I see the trauma that's happened in my family that plays out in really weird ways to this day, and all those people that I never got to meet because they got murdered.
Mm.
What happens if there was Jewish Lives Matter in 1930s Germany?
Wow.
What happens if there was more racial literacy programs within Poland, Vienna, Hungary, you name it? That is a lesson that still has not been learned.
Mm.
It was not just about Anglo and Teutonic and Germanic and Polish Christian folks that hated Jewish, Romani, gay, Jehovah's Witness, you name it. There was money to be made in that hate, right? It's a whole system. It was a system, and a lot of people made money off of it. And I just see some of that crap, and I'm sure you do too, playing out today on this continent. And everyone's like, whoa, we've never seen this before. Like, this is so weird. But we have, and you and I have studied history, and we know what's up. And it's like the train is coming, and we're like, stop the tracks, and it's just, it's frustrating, because you feel the train coming, and you're just like, I don't want this to happen again.
Mm.
I don't know,
Yeah. And sometimes I don't see it coming, and the
Yeah.
train came by, and people are like, "Hey, didn't you see the train?" I'm like, "Shit, I didn't see. Wow, you're right. Oh, I beat myself up, and
Yeah.
and
It's
try
part
to
of,
remember that next time. Try to be better next time,
yeah.
right?
And we're never going to be perfect, and that's okay. But every time we're called out, be like, I messed up. I got to do better. And I got to tell 10 other people that I know that are doing the same exact thing. They also have to be better. Those are ripple effects. Any last words of wisdom for our folks listening?
uh,
I like the James Baldwin quote. That was dope.
yeah, isn't that great? Yeah, it's just, Alan Creighton. He's no longer with us. But some things that he told me that I need to remind myself, particularly when I'm down and I'm not feeling good about the work I'm doing, or
Yeah.
feeling incompetent, or feeling like I am the problem, is to keep showing up, and to keep showing up, and to keep showing up.
That's right. That's right. That's what it is. Keep showing up. I like that.
Keep showing up, be authentic, but to keep showing up. You're going to build trust if you keep showing up. If you show up around, you show up when you mess up,
Yeah.
and take responsibility for it. If you show up when somebody else messes up,
Yeah.
you can be able to show up in solidarity with others. Just
Right.
keep showing up.
And don't be so defensive. It's okay. Like, we modeling that. You know, I think the white fragility punchback thing is way too popular right now,
Mm, mm.
and it's not helping anybody. And my friend said the trauma and pain that others inflict on others is actually causes trauma
Mm.
and pain to the one that is doing it.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of folks that are walking around with a lot of baggage that they need to unpack themselves. Whew, it's a journey. It's a journey. But all right. Thank you, Craig Alimo, for being here. San Jose State, big ups. Very excited that we got someone from San Jose State. I need to come visit when COVID is done.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no doubt.
that would be really cool. Um, Joe Brooks, thank you as always for having us on the Spotlight series, communityworksinstitute.org. Please check them out. If you want racial justice trainings, social justice trainings for your K through 12 and K through 16 educators, so that they can bring some of this cool stuff we're talking about in this discussion into the classroom, into the administration halls. Go to the summer and winter institutes of communityworksinstitute.org. And as always, like you said, keep showing up, keep learning, keep questioning yourself.
That's Alan. That's Alan. I can't claim that. I can't claim it, but I'll give ups to one of our elders who's no longer with us. So
Amen. Amen. All right. All right, everybody. Also, yes, we have upcoming Spotlight special guests that I won't give away right now, but Fridays and Sundays, please tune in. Thank you all for coming. Have a beautiful, blessed Sunday, and stay safe. 2 masks, COVID times. All right, everybody. Bye.